Clay Thomas. Here. Christina Hill.
Here.
Lee Lawrence.
Here.
Brad Stanley.
Here.
Kim Toulouse.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Pledge of Allegiance. Ms. Hill, would you please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Next is ethics law announcement. Mr. Lloyd, could you step in and do that for us?
Can't tell if this is on. All right, board members are reminded that if, with respect to any matter or any person coming before the board today, you have received a gift or loan, you have a pecuniary interest, you have a commitment in a private capacity such as a family, employment, business, or similar relationship, or you provided representation or counseling before an agency to a person or entity for compensation within the last year on a matter being considered, you must disclose that gift, loan, interest, commitment, or prior representation at the time the matter is being considered, and you must furthermore abstain from deliberation or voting on the matter if it is clear that the gift, loan, interest, commitment, or prior representation would materially affect the independence of judgment of a reasonable person. Board members are also reminded that under the Board of Adjustment rules, if you have had any contact outside this meeting with any person interested in a matter coming before the board today, you should disclose the nature of that contact at this meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Would you also please address the appeal procedure?
All right, most decisions rendered by the Board of Adjustment are appealable to the Board of County Commissioners. If you disagree with the decision of the Board of Adjustment and you want to appeal its action, you may do so in writing within 10 calendar days from the date that the decision being appealed is signed by the Secretary of the Board of Adjustment and mailed to the original applicant in the proceeding being appealed in accordance with Washoe County Code. Please call the planning staff immediately at 328-6100 for information on the appeal procedure and application fee.
Thank you very much. Next is the general public comment. Any person is invited to speak on any item on or off the agenda during this period. Action may not be taken on the matter raised during the public comment period until the matter is specifically listed on the agenda as an agenda item. Madam Secretary, do we have anyone wishing to speak at this time?
We have no public comment.
Thank you very much. Next is possible action to approve the agenda. Before we get into that, it is my intent today to take a couple of the agenda items out of order. What I'd like to do is hear first the Children's Cabinet event, which is WADMIN 19-0015, and then after that we will hear the winery, which is WADMIN 19-0014. With that, possible action to approve the agenda.
Move to approve the amended agenda.
Second, Mr. Stanley, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next, possible action to approve the July 11th, 19 draft minutes. Is there any discussion amongst board members on this item?
I'm going to abstain since I was not there.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay, I'll accept the motion.
Move to, go ahead.
That's so move.
Okay. Second, Lawrence, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Moving on. First item on the agenda is, we will hear is administrative case number WADMIN 19-0015. That'll be Ms. Olander, but before we get started, are there any disclosures from the board members? Thank you. Ms. Olander, the podium is yours.
Good afternoon, Julie Olander with Planning and Building. Before you, you have an administrative permit for the Children's Cabinet for their event, Art of the Child. This event is proposed to be held at the Montreux Golf Course on August 23rd, and the requirement is that we bring this before the board because it does qualify as a community outdoor event. The Art of the Child event is an annual event that the Children's Cabinet has it's their main fundraiser. They estimate 600 to 650 people will attend the event. The event is private, and tickets are sold to attend the event, which includes a live and silent auction along with cocktails and a 3-course meal. The event is held on, it's going to be held on the 23rd between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. The setup is on August 19th, and I want to bring that to your attention. It was a different date on the staff report. And then the cleanup will be completed on the 24th. The tickets are sold online and at the event, varying from the price of $25 to $350. The food is prepared off-site and then served at the Montreux location under 2 tents that are 40 by 120 feet on 68 tables. Parking is available at the golf course, at the clubhouse, and then along the south side of Desjardins Lane. And then there are also golf cart valets that will take the guests from the clubhouse to the event site. Montreux has or will be notifying the residents of the event and the parking plan. Here's sort of a layout of the parking. To the left, we show the volunteer parking, and then at the top in the circle, dark circle, is the event location. We have the valet drop-off location, the EMS location, and then also where they can park along Desjardins Lane. And then here's a layout of the event itself. The blue boxes are the tents, the pink is the wash stand and the restrooms, and then in the black box is cocktail area, and so that's the location and also the layout. Public notice was sent to the 500 parcels, to parcels within 500 feet. It was presented to the South Truckee Meadows Washoe Valley Cab on July 11th, and the cab approved the event. Various agencies have provided comments, and some provided conditions, which are included in the conditions of approval. I do want to bring it to your attention the pre-condition approval, the pre-event conditions have been all provided by the Children's Cabinet, so they have met all those conditions on the pre-event. Staff is able to make the 4 findings, which are shown on page 7 of your staff reports, and does recommend approval. And I provide a possible motion, and I'm available for questions, and also the applicant is here and available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions board members have on Ms. Olander? Julie, I just have one quick one. When I reviewed the application, the documentation, I didn't see anything about amplified sound.
It's there.
Is it there?
It is there.
Okay.
I thought it was there. It's in, on the conditions as item 1E, all amplified sound shall end by 9 PM.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I just did not see that. I don't believe I saw that when I looked at the applicant's application, but as long as there's an ending timeframe, I'll accept that. Thank you.
And I have one question.
Yes. Ms. Olander, one more?
Sorry.
Sorry. I saw again, the 9 o'clock, turn the sound down. But when does the event start? And that's probably one I missed as well. What time? I see that everything closes up at 10. But
The
what
event
time?
is from 4 to 9.
From 4 to 9. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you. Is the applicant present? Do they wish to speak on this item? Please. Come up to the podium. State your name for us, please.
My name is Amelia Lane. I'm the event manager for the Art of Childhood event, and I don't think any comments unless there's any questions for me.
All right, thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this matter?
We have no public comment.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to the board for discussion. Any discussion? Mr. Luce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is the, gosh, what, 4th year this event, something like that, third year? I don't remember exactly, but we've seen it before this board a number of times, and to the best of my knowledge, there have been no issues, no complaints, no problems, and I'm wondering, and this is probably a question or something we could discuss at some point, Mr. Lloyd, the necessity of bringing an event like this to the board. Maybe we could possibly look at streamlining the process a little bit and having it go through the director's review process and having the permits issued that way, especially for events like this that have been virtually no problem every time. That's my only comment. I think it's a great event, all for it.
Thank you. I think we can have more discussion on this on item 11 under the directors and legal counsel items. Thank you. Any other further comments? No. I'll entertain a motion on this. Ms. Hill?
I'll make a motion. I move that after given reasoned consideration to the information contained in the staff report and the information received during the public hearing, the Board of Adjustment approve, subject to the conditions contained as Exhibit A in the staff report, administrative permit case number WAD-MIN 19-0015 for Children's Cabinet and administrative permit under WCC Section 110.310.20 and authorize the Director of the Planning and Development Division to issue an outdoor community event business license pursuant to WCC 25.272 when all pre-event conditions have been completed.
It falls in line with consistency. And
Excuse me, Julie Olander for the record. I just want to, that should be planning and building department versus development. I apologize for that error. Should be planning and building.
Thank you.
It will be signed by the Director of Planning and Building.
Thank you.
Authorized by the Director of Planning. Based on the findings of consistency, improvements, site suitability, issuance not detrimental, and effect on a military installation.
Thank you. Have a second?
Second.
Mr. Stanley, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Next item on the agenda is WAD-MIN 19-0014, which is the winery, and we have Mr. Rozcek, which will be presenting. Prior to that, are there any disclosures?
Something of a disclosure. I attended both the CAB meeting around this subject and then visited the site and drove around a bit in that area.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else? Chris, podium is yours.
Chris Bronzik, Washoe County Planning. So before you is WADMIN 19-14. This is the De La Montaña Winery. So the applicant is proposing to put a winery and vineyard within the LDS zone. Crop production, which is the vineyard use, is allowed by right. However, the winery use type does require an administrative permit, which is what's before you today. They are proposing a 4,200 square foot building, and the two things to note are the production area, roughly 1,200 square feet, and then the tasting and barrel rooms, which will be about 2,400 square feet. The two parcels are roughly 2 acres in size total, and they are proposing 1 acre of vineyard. So with this being in the low-density suburban zone, no special events are allowed. This is a zoning requirement, so there's no alternative avenue for them to bring in and start doing weddings or anything of that nature. So the applicant has provided ample parking. They're providing 16 parking spaces, and the development code requires only 5 for a tasting room. This site is served by municipal water and sewer, and the applicants have been working with Washoe County Engineering in terms of traffic study. So the traffic counts that we have been provided by our in-house staff is roughly 30 ADT. That's the equivalent of about 2.5 houses. The applicant's proposing 4 full-time personnel. And then one thing that really stood out is the next item. So the property has had established CC&Rs since 1964. And these CC&Rs, if I understood correctly, were prohibitive of commercial ventures. And so the applicant worked with the immediate neighbors and the individuals who are under these CC&Rs to amend and rescind those existing CC&Rs, which occurred in May of this year. So this is a vicinity map of the subject property. There are 2 properties. The map does not indicate that, but it is located off of Mount Rose Highway and Bordeaux Drive. The applicants provided a site plan for us. The site plan, the primary things of note is the parking and service area to the south, as well as the retention basin. So they are offering up a retention basin to address any on-site drainage issues. Additionally, they have provided a landscape plan. So a couple things to note about the landscape plan. Per Washoe County standards, the landscape plan does not meet Washoe County Development Code. The applicant has indicated that they are going to be requesting certain waivers related to the landscaping. 2 of them to note are the fence requirements, so solid barrier fence around commercial property that is adjacent to residential uses, and 1 tree every 20 linear feet. However, this landscape plan does indicate a Y connection that leads to the adjacent residential property, and then a main drive to this property. The application did indicate that the access would be paved. So this is the overhead photo of a subject site. The blue is the site in question, and the red is the access that they will be utilizing. As you can see, it's at the turnaround right ahead of Montreux. And directly to the south is what is being used currently as the construction access entrance to Montreux. So with the access, there was a irrevocable offer, roadway irrevocable offer for dedication that was presented to the county, both with parcel map number 3090 and document 1926933. This was offered and signed in September of 1995. However, in discussion with engineering today, it does not seem like Washoe County has accepted that offer. So this application has caused considerable input from the public. We've received about 20 emails in opposition, and we had a number of individuals who opposed this application at the Citizen Advisory Board meeting. Some of the concerns that were raised were traffic issues on Bordeaux, specifically with congestion and accidents on the ingress and egress to Mount Rose Highway, as well as it being a school bus drop-off spot. There was concerns that this would change the appearance to the entrance of Montreux. It would have potential negative impacts on property values, and there was concerns that other businesses may follow if this were to get approved. Additionally, we've also received numerous emails and phone calls in support of this application. Some of the comments that were provided was that this is a tasting room, it's not a bar. There's, at least in their eyes, little concern for drunk driving. They believe that it would enhance the area and actually, counterpoint, would increase the property values. Additionally, we've also received public input from neighbors regarding the fencing requirements. So again, the waiver that the applicant's going to be requesting of the commercial barrier fence. And the indicator from the majority of the people that reached out was that they would prefer to see into the property and enjoy the vineyards instead of seeing a solid fence, a wood fence, or whatever would be proposed. So the applicant has provided staff with conditions that go above and beyond what the development code requires. And they did so in an effort to try and mitigate some of the concerns that were brought forth at the Citizen Advisory Board meeting. So they are going to install signage at the exit of the driveway indicating the presence of school drop-off zones and children present. Additionally, they're proposing to work with Washoe County Engineering to sign that portion of Bordeaux with the appropriate signage indicating, again, school bus and children playing. Additionally, the owner will limit the hours of operation to appointment only on Monday through Thursday, and specifically limit appointments between 2:30 and 4:30 p.m. to address those school times. So with the additional conditions of approval, I've touched up on this first one already. However, we did hear back from Washoe County Park staff. Parks is requesting to remove their condition. It came to their attention that there's an alternate and preferred route for the trail alignment, so they'd like their condition removed entirely. Engineering has also provided staff with updated conditions earlier today, and those conditions relate to a private access easement and maintenance agreement along the existing shown irrevocable access agreement. So the full conditions of approval can be found in Exhibit A, but they will not show those amended conditions. Additionally, staff, so I have worked with the applicant to amend Condition 1I. So the existing language states that no outdoor storage of machinery or tools will be permitted. Machinery and tools used for agricultural purposes must be stored indoors. The new language proposed is agricultural machinery and tools shall be screened from adjacent properties when not in use. So this is in line with the development code, and the above language is above and beyond what the development code would permit. So the required findings for this admin permit are consistency. This is consistent with the master plan and the forest area plan. There's nothing in there that would prohibit such a use. Improvements, they've got service for municipal sewer, they've got service for water, they have the required improvements to allow for such a use. Site suitability, Washoe County's master plan indicated that this was a developable property with no constraints. Issuance not detrimental. So I did want to touch up on this. This states that the issuance of the permit will not be significantly detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare, injurious to the property or improvements of adjacent properties, or detrimental to the character of the surrounding area. So one thing to note is Galena Sports directly to the west and across from Mount Rose Highway, and Great Basin Institute, which has Caldwell Banker, it's a commercial entity, is also directly to the west, one property over. That Great Basin Institute and Caldwell Banker, they are also located on a low-density suburban residential lot. Additionally, I asked Mr. Lloyd to hand out an email that was provided to me from the applicant. The applicant has been working with Stan Jaksic, who's one of the partners for Montreux Development Company. And basically, the email states that they would like to add an additional condition. This condition would take over the maintenance agreement for that easement which would be over, Mr. Montaigne would take that over, and any successor property owners within that area that would be utilizing this access easement. They do have a presentation after this, so they will be able to address that a little further and with much more clarity. However, staff did not see the approval of this to be detrimental to any surrounding property owners. And then this effect on a military installation. There's no military installation nearby, so this required finding need not be made. Staff is recommending approval with conditions, and I provided a motion above. If you have any questions, I'm available.
Thank you, Mr. Benedict. Are there any questions?
Yeah, Chris, I have one.
Mr. Lawrence?
In the conditions, the ag machinery is looking to be screened. How is that affected by someone who may live at a higher elevation to this property, who can see a tractor or something like that, some machinery in use? Would there be amendments regarding to be housed in a garage or something to mitigate that, any visual objection where someone could clearly see a piece of machinery?
So I discussed this condition with Chad Giesinger. He is the planning manager for code enforcement. Code enforcement would be the primary individuals that do come out and respond to such inquiries. And if it's screened by a 6-foot barrier, a fence, landscaping under their code, it's screened. It's properly screened. There's no recourse. However, because it's an agricultural use, utilizing the tractor inside and out, this change did make sense. So that's why we worked with staff to move forward with this. Again, the requiring it to be indoors, that's above and beyond what what our development code would allow us to enforce.
So, yeah, and I understand if you're building more buildings to house machinery, that's also a visual obscurity and things like that. Could be a visual nuisance. I'm just concerned about a 6-foot fence and a backhoe arm that goes up 12 feet or something like that above, and the potential concerns that might arise from that is, I guess what I'm asking is, can there be amendments made to where the applicant, if there are complaints of something of this nature, where the applicant amendments can be made to force them to build a larger screen or put a trellis over it or something like that to make it less of a visual nuisance?
So I may ask Trevor to jump in here. However, what I would think is, well, we potentially couldn't do that. You as the board could amend such a condition that if there's complaints that come forth, that you or planning could then bring it back to the Board of Adjustment. But I'm going to let Trevor jump in.
I'll try to be a little delicate as I answer this question, because it can be a little challenging requiring an applicant to come forward if they're meeting all of their required conditions. If it's clearly a code enforcement or a code violation matter, that would typically be handled in-house, where we would seek to get voluntary compliance. So I think in that regard, if I got your question correct, Mr. Lawrence, if you're concerned that maybe down the road they're not meeting certain requirements, or some visual concerns are popping up, and you wanted an opportunity to review it after a period of time, it may be in your interest to ask them to come back after a certain amount of time to ensure that that's being complied. I don't know if that's the desire of this board, but that it certainly is an option.
Thank you, Trevor.
Mr. Stanley?
To add a bit on this, Mr. Lloyd, the property there is, as I've mentioned, I visited the property, is inclined from the Bordeaux area up to the Mount Rose area. And a number of the homes are therefore above, or at least one set of them, are therefore above the property itself. And as was mentioned, they would be looking down on that. Does that modify your thinking at all?
Actually, Chris, if I could ask you to put on the overhead, I don't know how much the property slopes, how visible it will be.
Yeah.
Maybe start with that one there.
So this is the best one, but it should be noted, as mentioned within the presentation, the immediate property owners did provide input that they would request those open fencing. So while it doesn't address the agricultural use, it seems like they're well aware of the visual impacts. I will let Dennis cover that in more detail, though. But this is the only overhead photo that I did provide. So if you want to.
Sure, Mr. Chandler.
Planner Ronsick, as long as you have that overhead up, can you point out where Jerry Kerr and the GBI building is located, please? And he's the fellow that asked specifically for the open fencing, as I recall.
Let's see if. So it's this building right here.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to turn around. I've got the pinpoint. It's this building right here.
Okay. And is that, so that access to that building as a commercial building is off Mount Rose, is that correct?
It is correct.
And that's the only access, is not accessible from,
That property does not have any additional access to it.
and that's zoned also low density suburban?
Correct.
Okay. And it, as we would assume, had the various permits to be able to operate a business from that location?
They do have their business license. I haven't looked into it further than that, but
But we
they've been
can
operating
assume.
for quite a bit.
Okay. Thank you. And
Continue.
I know, since we were both, all of us, I guess, at the CAB meeting, I don't think I heard too many complaints and quite a few laudatory remarks, actually, about the winery portion. I think the concern was over the tasting room and traffic, largely would be the way I would kind of summarize it. So I'm wondering here, when it says the special use or the AP is to permit a winery, and I've had to do some homework about when an administrative permit was required and so forth, and the conditions. Do we have a definition of a winery? Does a winery by default include a tasting room?
So the winery allows for a tasting room as associated with the use type, as well as a vineyard. So I believe Trevor's going to pull up the formal definition.
Okay.
But a tasting room
Okay.
is part of it.
While we wait for that, let me just, I'll address this to the board too. I also went out to the site and looked it over, and I can tell you from Mount Rose proper, looking in a, southerly direction, you do actually look down onto that property. You can see all that property back down in there from the actual road. There are houses that do sit above it. It does tear down to the lower section there, but the houses that you see more or less facing Mount Rose do sit above it at a higher elevation. So that's just a bit of clarification. Mr. Lawrence?
Yeah, Chris, just one more question. I just kind of give me some clarification on the zoning here on this. So we're looking at a commercial zoning, correct?
It's a commercial use type. However, the winery use type is only permitted in the general rural agricultural, low-density suburban, medium-density suburban are the only two that require the admin permit. However, the lower-density residentials and the GR and GRA allow this by right.
So because it has an agricultural designation to it, this gives it an opportunity to fit into what you're saying, right?
So the agricultural portion of this is not associated with the winery whatsoever. So what you see before you is actually two uses. One is the winery, which has that associated tasting room, barrel room, production area, and then the vineyard that's allowed to go with it. However, the vineyard as itself is crop production. Crop production is that agricultural use. But the winery itself is a separate commercial use.
Okay, so just to clarify for me, what types of businesses could fit this zoning designation for this property? Could you give me some other examples?
Very few. So I believe, I don't have the code in front of me, but I'm gonna try and speak from memory. I believe the other options that you would see are daycares. And what we have in our code is what's called a neighborhood center. This neighborhood center, while it wouldn't permit stuff like restaurants, it could permit a whole number of additional commercial uses. However, if they were to come in for a neighborhood center use type, it would still require a permit, a discretionary permit. Unlike this, which requires an admin permit, however, that would require a special use permit, which is a level above what's being brought before you right now.
Okay, I just want to get an idea of the other businesses, daycares, things like that, that you might find in a neighborhood setting, but not a fast food restaurant or,
No.
okay. All right, that's reasonable. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Lloyd, do you have something for us?
I do.
Thank you.
I apologize, I had lost my place. It's a rather large description, fairly lengthy. So, and I have no problem reading it in, but I think it might be helpful if you understand the full context of what we're looking at here. So say, the winery use type refers to a facility comprising the buildings or space used to make wine as an alcoholic beverage obtained by the fermentation of the natural content of fruits or other agricultural products containing sugar. A winery includes crushing of fruit, fermenting, bottling, blending, bulk and bottle storage, aging, shipping, and receiving of wine-making materials, laboratory equipment, associated maintenance equipment, and administrative office functions related to the operation of the winery. A winery may or may not have a vineyard associated with it and may include a public tasting room and the sale of merchandise related directly to the winery. A winery may only sell at retail by the bottle or serve by the glass on its premises. Wine produced, blended, or aged on site by the winery subject to any limitations set forth in NRS 597240. And it goes on a little bit. Would you like me to continue? Or does that give you the gist of what this is? Okay.
Mr. Stanley, go ahead.
Two more questions, Chris, and thank you very much for that. Because I kept looking for the winery and tasting room since that was where the conflict was in the CAB meeting. Hours of traffic and hours of use and special events. So take them kind of in any order, but I know, and much appreciated that the hours have been adjusted, but can you, we've got quite a lot of information about drop-off times and that sort of thing for school, and Monday through Friday, but I heard Monday through Thursday. So can you talk to us again about the hours of operation, particularly around the tasting room? Because I don't think anybody cares whether or not the vines are growing well during school hours, but the tasting and then the special events, which I'm a little confused on because I thought you said no, and then I'm kind of reading in the application, yes.
So the application may indicate that they would have liked to have special events. However, the zoning listed LDS doesn't permit it.
Okay.
Even if they came through with a special use permit that potentially would allow for special events, it's not permitted in an LDS zone. So there's no workaround. They're not going to be able to come back and get a permit that would allow for weddings or anything of that nature. However, with the tasting room aspect of things, I think it might be best if I let the applicant speak to that. Based off of what they provided to me with their above and beyond conditions, they're they are proposing to limit the hours, limit Monday through Thursday during their hours of operation to be appointment only, and then further limiting the number of appointments between 2:30 and 4:30 p.m. Shall I have Dennis come up and speak more to that?
When we have all the questions that we need to ask you, then we'll go ahead and bring the applicant up.
Okay.
And the board can ask questions specific to them. Mr. Stanley?
That's fine for now. Thank you.
Mr. Browning, I do have a question for you. On page 3 of your document here, under administrative permit definition, the actual last sentence that you've written, or that is written, I should say, says, "Winery with special events is not permitted within an LDS regulatory zone. However, crop production is allowed use within an LDS regulatory zone." So I guess I'm confused. Clarify that for me.
So
It seems like the winery is not allowed, but crop production is allowed.
that's incorrect. So the reason I outlined this is because our development code outlines two things. One, the winery use type, and two, the winery use type with special events. So the winery use type is fully allowed with a administrative permit in the LDS zone. However, special events with the winery use type are not allowed whatsoever. And so that was what that was trying to convey, that the winery is allowed with this administrative permit. And then again, crop production is an allowed use by right. They don't need permission to move forward with crop production.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Hill?
I have a question regarding the red line on that overhead. Is the end of Bordeaux Drive that court area?
It is, yes.
And so then this is like a private easement?
So originally, this was an irrevocable roadway agreement, which allowed for public use access. It's still considered a public access. It is providing access to a number of properties, as you can see there. However, Washoe County did not accept that. So as of right now, it's still a private access easement. And the document that Mr. Lloyd handed out to you was an additional condition that the applicant had brought forth, that they would be willing to take on the maintenance of that easement.
And so is there a school bus stop there at the end of Bordeaux?
So so the applicant reached out to the Washoe County School District. And the school district stated that the school bus stop, I believe, is further up on Bordeaux. There's an extension road that goes to the east that serves a number of additional houses, and that's roughly where the stop would be.
Okay. So it's not really, the bus stop isn't in that picture?
I think I may let the
When we
applicant
open it up
speak
to the public, we'll go ahead and get that information, get it straightened out.
But it is, that red line is a paved road.
That red line right now is not paved.
It's not paved.
It is not.
So will it be paved?
The application indicated as such.
Okay. Hard to plow if it's not paved, I guess. And it would only really, it would be very seasonal, like, hey, you couldn't grow grapes year-round, right? Or, who knows?
I am not a
Okay.
winery expert, so.
No.
Mr. Stanley?
Yeah, Yeah, Chris, on traffic, some of the questions were just brought up, I think, and we'll have to have somebody point with the laser beam at where there was both as I recall, there was a bus stop and then there were several pickup spots, whatever that means, where the parents would pick up the kids that were let out of the bus or were carpooled or something. So I think those would be some of the questions, if you'll recall, from Cap.
Correct.
The other question that people were asking about is, and having, of course, the day I picked to go visit, it was Barracuda, so I wouldn't guess that that would be exactly the traditional traffic pattern, but I noticed there's kind of a traffic analysis of sorts on the very last page of the full documentation that assesses what traffic might be. Using a multiplier commonly used in the wine country in Napa, Sonoma. Do we, as part of the process, does the county, do we rely exclusively on the applicant to say how traffic would be addressed, or is there some process here, since a permit is being requested, that an analysis for traffic, particularly given the location's interest in drinking and the traffic associated with that, be done? That's a long-winded sentence. Shorten it up.
I got it.
Can
So
you county guys work on this?
that's definitely an engineering question. However, engineering, when they do these reviews, they do their own calculations. So Mitch Fink is our traffic engineer up in engineering, and he did work with the applicant. So anything over 80 ADT would require a traffic analysis be submitted alongside the permit. Based off of the discussions and the calculations that engineering did, this did not exceed that threshold. Therefore, traffic analysis was not necessary.
If I may, is that documented anywhere other than here? Other than this applicant's analysis? If in fact any of the residents wanted to say, gee, what was the ADT estimate from the county on this, is such documentation available to them?
I'm sure it is. I know that the engineering, when they do their own review, typically we don't see the nitty-gritty of their review. We receive their conditions associated with their review.
And my last question around.
Also, if I can, if you don't mind, our traffic engineers base the traffic volumes off of the use type as well as the size of the facility, and it's basically, it's a calculated model that they use. And Chris is correct that the proposed traffic, the traffic that's proposed to be generated by this use comes nowhere near what we would generally require for a full traffic analysis.
Thank you. And the last, if I may, question on traffic. There was some discussion, as I recall, about all of the traffic or about an additional roadway being added. Do you recall that, or am I missing something there? Some access directly off Mount Rose?
Yes, so I do recall that. So a couple things related to the traffic. We both were at the same meeting, and outside of that, some of the other additional information and concerns that the public did have was accessing Mount Rose from Bordeaux. So some of the concerns that they had were potentially inebriated drivers going on to Mount Rose, which has a less than stellar viewpoint to the west. Again, engineering did review everything. Engineering did not provide any sort of concerns, conditions, or any reason to deny this project. They look at all that stuff. Additionally, with your question, they did look at that additional access easement. So there is an access easement that comes, if you turn your head, through here. So they do have an access that comes through here. However, engineering determined that that access is not sufficient for this use type. whereas this developed area in this irrevocable agreement is. So, and that came, so. But there is that access. It's just not wide enough or sufficient enough for this use type.
So aside from the documentation on that, should there be any, that access will not then be used?
That access is not
Okay, 'cause it was open-
indicated to be used. It's not shown to be used. And my understanding with engineering is it's not something that they would prefer to be used.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any more questions? Thank you. Is the applicant present, and would they wish to speak on this matter?
Thank you. For the record, Dennis Troy with Realm Constructors. I think we covered everything. Should be good, right? With me today, I have Kurt Stitzer with Realm Constructors, and also Dennis and Tina De La Montagna, the owners of this project. First, I wanted to thank staff for working on this. We've been having discussions with staff for about 18 months now. We've gone through a number of different sites, and we ended up settling on the perfect site that essentially checks all of the boxes. So we're excited to be here in front of you today. Just a little bit of history about the De La Montagna family. They come from a long lineage of about 6 generations of farmers and ranchers. They've spent the last 25 years making wine, and currently they own 3 different boutique wineries. They own properties in various different areas that range in size from 5 acres to 50 acres, culminating in about 200 acres of total crop production for their vineyards, where they then source from those vineyards to actually produce their wine. They specialize in these handcrafted small batch wines. Here's a picture of one of their boutique wineries down in the Healdsburg area. As you can see, they're very prideful, and they take a lot of pride in their properties. So let's talk a little bit about a boutique winery. So when people think about wineries, they probably think of these mass productions, such as Gallows, that are producing 1 million cases a year. This is not that. This is a small site. As you know, it's about a 2-acre site. They're going to grow approximately 1+ acres of grapes actually physically on the site. And then the structure itself is going to be about a 4,000 square foot, a little bit more, barrel room, tasting, and production space. There's also limited hours, just because there is downtime. You can't grow grapes year-round. They don't grow well in snow. And so they actually shut their operation down towards the middle of December, towards April in the spring. They are proposing to have by appointment only Monday through Thursday, and then Friday and Sunday operations will be essentially from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m., which is when the tasting and education of the wines could take place. A little bit of history on this. This use does require an administrative permit. There's 2 paths to essentially have an administrative permit approved. The first one is that you can notify all property owners within 500 feet. They all write you a letter saying, we approve of this use, and you're on your merry way. This use within 500 feet has the Forest Service, BLM, TUMWA, and a couple other public agencies. I think we all know that it can take a long time to get anything from those agencies. So we consulted with staff, we washed our hands of that, and we said, you know what, let's go straight down the administrative permit process through the Board of Adjustment, which is how we ended up here today. Like I said, we spent over 18 months searching for the perfect site that met all the requirements of the Washoe County Code. That be the zoning, public sewer and water, access. We had a number of pre-applications with the county and went as far as to entering into escrow on 5 other properties that just didn't check all the boxes, unfortunately. So we selected this site because of the location, the exposure to sun, which is very important, the access, and then also the compatibility. Well, I said that we've been working on this for about 18 months with staff. This project actually goes back about 3 years. 3 years ago, the state code, or essentially the state, amended its law to allow for these types of uses. And furthermore, Washoe County amended its code to allow for this type of use in this specific zoning district. We've somewhat covered this. This is the location of the site. I'll take a minute to address this access. This access is actually, there's an easement on there that's held by the Montreux Development LLC, Stan Jasic. We've been working with Stan on this, and at about 1:14 today, we submitted the email that you received. Currently, he's responsible for all the maintenance associated within that easement. That condition was drafted such that when we do improve this road, it's no longer his easement, or I'm sorry, the maintenance is no longer his. We expect to take that over. We want to expect to improve that road and then have him take on the maintenance of it. So we plan on doing that. So this administrative permit is actually the first of its kind that has ever gone through Washoe County. Like I said, this was amended. The code was amended to allow for this use within this zoning district. But you also have to consider the mitigation for the effects of the surrounding uses. So when we're looking at the site planning and the layout of this site, you know, we recognize that we could use the vineyards to buffer to the adjacent residences and increase that setback. We also looked at limiting the hours to respect them, so people aren't there at all hours of the day. There's plenty of parking on the site. Like I said, it requires 5 parking spots. We're going to provide about 15. The De La Montañas also pride themselves in sustainable farming practices. And then finally, we really want this to blend in to the surrounding uses. We don't want something to stick out like a sore thumb. So I wanted to spend a couple minutes talking about the operation and the operational characteristics of the business. First of all, this is a production facility along with a tasting room and then also the barrel room for storage. They will have probably 4 to 8 rotating wines for patrons to taste. There is a big educational component that goes along with that they pride themselves in. We've already talked about, you know, the limited hours of operation, but with this business model, guests typically stay 30 minutes to an hour. There's no food on the site. They learn about their wines, and the goal is to have them learn about their wines, try the wines, purchase wine, and leave. Like I said, the business model shows that turnover is key. When people, you know, loiter around, it just doesn't work for their business model. So again, this isn't a wine bar or a lounge. There's no food. It's a place to come in, learn about the wines that they're producing, purchase a bottle, and head on your merry way. So I spent a pretty decent amount of time working with Mitch Fink, the Washoe County traffic engineer, on generating how many trips this use was actually going to have. And as Chris alluded to, the threshold is essentially 80 daily trips, which requires a traffic analysis. This use fell under that by a significant amount. As far as outside of patrons visiting the site, there's about 5 to 10 large truck deliveries. So these are 10-wheel box trucks. There's no truck and trailers. You aren't going to see an 18-wheeler going in there unloading. And then also 10 to 12 small truck deliveries, about 8 to 12-foot box trucks. This is per year. It's not per month. So over the year, you're going to see, 17 to 22 of these delivery trucks show up on the site. For the site improvements, as Chris previously discussed, there's crop production, a little bit over 1 acre of vines on the site. There's also landscaping in the common areas and adjacent to the neighbors. Right now, there's, if you're out there in the spring, there's some sheet flow that comes across the top of the site, so there will be groundwater containment. It'll also have permanent utility connections. The nice thing about building this site out is that the utilities are in place, as well as the water and sewer as well. A use like this is not feasible in our area on a well or on a septic system. Also, you'll see driveway improvements, parking, and then also signage. We've also been working with Don Coombs and Fire, and the existing plan doesn't have a fire turnaround, but the future plan certainly will have a hammerhead in there where they can get an apparatus in there and turn it around. I think I hit the power button. Again, here's a picture of the site. Architecture. Again, this is about a 4,000 square foot building. Just to give you a frame of reference, the neighbors just to the southwest, that residence is about 7,000 square feet. It's also built into the hillside, so you aren't going to see a 4,000 square foot box. We've been working with a local architect who designs a lot of homes within this area, and so the goal is to provide a contemporary yet kind of rustic feel using the natural materials, standing seam roof, board and bat siding. It'll be a good-looking building. It's also going to provide some outdoor seating and patio space for those people that do want to spend some time and check the area out. And the public areas are actually screened and designed to face away from the residential uses. Here are a couple of the pictures. And I wanted to focus on, Mr. Lawrence, you had asked about outdoor storage and whatnot. So this area, I'm pointing over here, the bottom right hand, or actually, how about right behind you? So this area is almost a delivery bay type of area. And there is, we do have equipment to work on the site. The thought was that we could put a piece of equipment in this area to keep it somewhat screened. However, if the neighbors were to be upset about that, there are different options to pull into the lower driveway where that equipment, I'll go back to the site plan. I'll make you turn around again. I think there are some options to store equipment down in here, which would mitigate the impacts of these people looking down into the site. But, the thought is that with, with some potential fencing or landscaping over here, that we could really get this area screened pretty well from this viewpoint. But if that can't be met, we would be more than accommodating to store equipment down here further out of the way. Okay, compatibility of surrounding uses. So this is what Chris had kind of touched on earlier. We have an agricultural use and we have a commercial use. How do we meet in the middle? This is an interesting one when it comes to applying commercial standards to what some may think is an agricultural type of use and how that kind of marries. Like I said, the code was amended to allow this pseudo commercial type of use in a low-density suburban zoning district. However, this type of use is not allowed in a commercial zoning district. So we really focused on respecting the neighbors, and building this out such that it provides a buffer with that agricultural type of use to the facility itself. 2 out of these 4 residences are right next to that 8,500 square foot office building. And, you know, to our knowledge, none of the surrounding neighbors directly adjacent to the property have opposed this project. In fact, most of them have written letters of support in regards to the fencing. I see that I have about a minute. Can I have a couple more minutes?
Yes, you may.
Yes, thank you. Moving right along, concerns of the public. We saw the 20 letters. We went through them very thoroughly, and we wanted to address them. There was a common theme between most of the letters that, you know, discussed the increased traffic, the safety associated with the school bus drop-off, whether or not this is a drinking establishment, and then also decreased property values. So like I said, and Chris said, this is going to generate about 30 trips, which is the equivalent of 2.5 to 3 single-family residences. So in comparison, just to kind of put this in perspective, the adjacent Montreux development has 140 vacant lots in it. When those get built out, you'll see an additional 1,300 trips coming through there. So this is not a bar or a cocktail lounge. Like I said, we want to focus on turning over, not having people necessarily loiter around there. And currently, it's a vacant parcel with no improvements on it. If anything, we believe that it's probably going to add value to the adjacent properties. And I think this is an important piece about traffic safety, drinking and driving. Studies have been done in the Napa-Sonoma area, and they actually just recently released and published one because the neighbors had raised concerns about these mega, large-scale wineries. That they did an independent study of local law enforcement agencies that actually show that there were no more DUI arrests prior to the boom of over 300 wineries in that area. So. Okay, here's, I put this map together to kind of talk about the school bus zone. I had a lengthy discussion with Mike Smith, the field safety supervisor for the Washoe County School District, to talk about both the drop-off point as well as the traffic patterns of the bus. Right now, there are no middle school or high school drop-offs here. It's only for elementary schools or elementary students from Hunsberger Elementary. Currently, he has 6 children that are eligible to ride to this drop-off and pickup point. He said, however, a few more slide onto the bus as well, so it's often more than that. The school bus, when it turns onto Bordeaux Drive, immediately takes a left down Jeff D. Court, where there's a turnaround there. It comes back and it parks at the intersection of Bordeaux and Jeff D. And this is from Mike. Parents typically line up along Bordeaux to pick up their students when they get off the bus. And the bus drop-off schedule is at 3:54 on Monday, Tuesday, Thursdays, and Fridays, and 3:09 on Wednesdays. So what we did in our proposed mitigation measures, our proposed conditions of approval, is that we limited our hours to by appointment only to bookend those drop-offs Monday through Thursday.
Mr. Troy, one more minute.
Okay. So as you can see, here are the conditions that we proposed for the hours of operation, limiting those appointments between 2:30 and 4:30, bookending the drop-offs. We're also proposing to put in signage as well. We've proposed those conditions. There's a couple conditions that we wanted to talk about. One of those being the fencing requirement. We actually have letters of support from the neighbors requesting that we install a transparent or a translucent fence. They don't want to stare at a 6-foot tall white vinyl fence. It doesn't fit this site. So we've proposed a condition to Chris that would modify that condition. And since I have a minute, I won't read through all of that, but it addresses it. We also had a concern about the landscaping requirements, putting trees 20 feet on center surrounding the property, and then also landscaping into the 20-foot setbacks surrounding the property. Those trees will eventually grow up, they'll shade the entire site, the crop will grow off. Furthermore, there's no trees on this site. It would probably look a little bit out of place. Respectfully, we would request that the grapes actually be used in that, the perimeter setback area for the front, side, and rear, but we will be landscaping on the interior of the site. And that's captured in that setback. And then finally, the outdoor storage condition that we spoke with Mr. Lawrence about, we would request that they be screened. We are amenable to, if there's any sort of code enforcement action, which we do not want, we absolutely have options to move it around the site. In closing, we're excited to bring the first winery and vineyard to the Truckee Meadows. I think we've shown a willingness to work with our neighbors, and more so than anything, we're excited to add to Washoe County and its community character. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Mr. Toulouse?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You stated earlier that there will be no food at the site, yet in the staff report, it says the application states that the intent is to sell prepackaged and sealed cheese, meat, et cetera. So are you, I just want it clear in my mind, are people not going to be allowed to consume what they purchase there, or?
So that's
Make it clear in my mind.
Yeah, so that's something that we're actually working through with Washoe County Environmental Health. Ultimately, it's going to be up to them if we choose whether or not to provide prepackaged foods. We thought it would be nice to have some sort of prepackaged crackers and cheese and salami on site if people wanted to hang out. But we'll look at that through the permitting process and see if it's an avenue that we want to go down. What we will not be doing is preparing food on site for sale, sit-down service, et cetera.
Okay, so it is your intention to provide or have food available for purchase that people can consume while they are there? You're
If
just,
allowed, yeah.
what you should say is there will be no food prep.
Correct.
Right? That's,
Correct.
okay.
Yes.
And then I need to see the amended language for these conditions of approval before I can even really give it much consideration. So I have to have that, either that or we stick with what's written.
Okay. Absolutely.
I agree with that. Any more questions? Mr. Stanley?
Thank you. I noticed, and I appreciate, and I'm sure everyone does, and I'm certain the neighborhood does, try your efforts to try to listen to what the market was saying. Could you go over again the changes in hours, going from the cab presentation, if you will, here's what we have, to the new approach? I'm trying to see what the delta is that you're suggesting here.
Sure. One second. It's split between two slides, but the way that it is proposed is that the hours of operation, Monday through Thursday, will be by appointment only. Somebody needs to physically call.
Don't mean to interrupt necessarily,
yes.
but what I'm looking for is the change, what it was originally when you presented it, and what you're adjusting it to now, which sounds very favorable, but I'm looking for the delta there, the change, if you don't mind.
I do not have the hours that were presented at the CAB meeting in front of me. Unfortunately, I was out of town during that meeting and was not able to attend. I can say, I can tell you that instead of going from a 7-day operation where anybody can come at all hours, or essentially when they're open from 11 to 6, that they have scaled back significantly the hours of operation from Monday to Thursday, like I said, by appointment only. I could have either Kurt Stitzer or Mr. De La Montagna come up here and speak further to that if you're looking for more clarification on that.
Let me dovetail in here. Mr. Troy, for my own edification, it says by appointment only Monday through Thursday. How many appointments can you have in a day?
We have not set a maximum or a minimum number on that.
So, I mean, if you, I'm just using a hypothetical number, but if you want to do something every half hour, you could do that and keep changing it over Monday through Thursday. I guess the term appointment only is a very broad term. It doesn't really give us an idea of what the numbers would be or could be.
Right, and so the reason that it's by appointment only is that there's going to be days where there's nobody there. There simply won't be any staff on the site, and so that's why it's by appointment only. The thought is of limiting those bus hours is that we probably aren't even going to schedule appointments during those hours, but, we'll consider that. If, 5 people call up and ask for an appointment at, 3:50 on Wednesday afternoon, and we know that there's a bus drop-off taking, place at that point, we're going to steer them a different direction.
Mr. Stanley?
I'm trying to get something sorted out, what sound to me like two conflicting kind of notions, and perhaps you can help us understand where there's no conflict. So one of the statements was, or one of the representations was, that this isn't an area to come and, I think you said, hang out. So people aren't going to spend much time there. Flip side, but we're going to, as represented by one of the questions, we're going to sell some food, and we're not sure whether they can drink what they bought there or not. We never really heard clarity on that at all. At least I didn't hear it. But how is having food on site available, maybe, through some future condition or application or use? And don't hang out. How do those work together?
So I think that what we're looking at is when you start preparing food on site, you trigger a substantial amount of permits through the Washoe County Environmental Health Department, and we aren't designing this building for food preparation. With food preparation and a sit-down meal extends your duration of your stay substantially. We, like I said, with this business model, we want to keep this short to a half hour to an hour. If people choose to, sit outside if they want to and have some cheese and crackers and prepackaged food if they will have that option. But like I said, the business model, and I'll let Mr. De La Montagna speak to that a little bit more, is that people are there for approximately 30 minutes to an hour, learning about the wines, trying the wines. Most people will purchase wines and leave. Some will choose to sit outside and chat, and we're completely open to that. But what we will not be offering is a sit-down 3-course meal paired with a number of different wines, and people are there for hours.
Mr. Troy, I have a question. Roughly about 1,500 feet away from you as the crow flies is the Lodge, which is a wine and coffee bar. Are you going to be selling any of your products to them? Are they going to be involved in this in any manner that you're aware of?
I would need to defer to Mr. De La Montagna.
And my other question is, we can ask him in just a minute, and then my other question is on the CC&Rs that were rescinded, if you can clarify this for me, the CC&Rs that were rescinded, do they only apply to 6 parcels?
I believe it was 6 or 7 parcels that are directly adjacent to this lot. And so we reached out to each individual property owner, let them know of our plans of what we were planning on developing this property into. We've been in direct communication with all of them. They were all on board. They were all willing to rescind those CC&Rs and such that it would allow for a commercial type of use.
And then further in, I guess, within the community, I don't know if you can answer this, then you would not be allowed to have commercial operations further in, other than for these 6 properties here.
Correct, yeah, this CC&R was written specifically for those lots.
So by the CC&Rs, by the recension, these 6 other lots can actually then come forward to us and ask for more commercial operations.
Correct, as long
According
as,
to the CC&Rs.
correct, yes.
Okay. And getting back to the original question about the wine bar across the street, is there any discussion or anything going on about whether they might sell some of their products and their wines to?
You know, I think it's a little bit early, but I absolutely believe that Mr. De La Montagna will be reaching out to the adjacent businesses.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stanley?
Thank you. I was going back to the changes made and in terms of accommodating the community, and you'd mentioned the hours. I think those are a great step forward, and I'm sure they'll be appreciated. The signage sounds like a change, an add, and that is all upside, I would think. Might have a little advertising on the side, signed to this accidentally, but can't hurt, help everyone. And then there was a change from 15 required spots, parking spots, to, or excuse me, 5 required to 15. Why?
Honestly, that's how the architect laid out the site.
I was asking
but-
because of the traffic and the only half hour.
I think that we would be a little bit pinched if we had just 5 parking spaces. There will be some days where there will be as many as 4 employees. That could potentially be 4 stalls taken up. You're left with one ADA stall, and people are parking every which way. So we felt that that was probably an appropriate amount of parking for the site.
Thank you.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yeah, Dennis, just a couple things here. So you guys are requesting that there be no trees, obviously I have an agricultural background, pretty strong, so I understand vineyards, wineries don't have trees around them, shading them for obvious reasons. I would be for that, by the way. I understand it would not look typical if it had trees every 20 feet surrounding the production areas, the fields, the grapes that are growing. Yeah, I just have one other question. The open fence, I know neighbors have talked about this. We've got a lot of deer and bear up in that country, and is this electric fence we might be looking at to deter these critters, or what's, if this, I like the open fence idea, the concept, as long as the neighbors surrounding this think it's a good idea. I just am curious as to what considerations would be given to this large, if you will, vermin, the deer and the bears that might want to wander in there.
Sure. And that's actually reflected in the conditions that I blew right by, is that the way that we rewrote that condition was such that I believe that it says a transparent, predatory-proof fence. So we definitely thought about that. The design of that is still to be determined. And so we're certainly exploring those options right now. We just knew that putting in 6-foot tall wrought iron or masonry fence at $40+ a square foot, that adds up. And it may not be that visually appealing to the neighbors as well. So,
Thank you.
yes.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Mr. Cluse?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lawrence brought up a really good point. I have a wildlife background and spent 35 years dealing with everything from bears to deer to, so when you talk about building a predator-proof fence, I have some pretty serious concerns on what that should look like. A 6 or 8 foot fence, a deer is going to go right over the top of it.
Absolutely.
And in all likelihood, if it's a wrought iron with a spike on the top, a lot of deer get feet caught in those fences and hang there and die. Bears will go right over the top of an 8-foot wrought iron fence. So I have real concerns about what kind of fencing that you're going to propose and what that would look like. And I just wanted to express that. I'd like to see a little more detail about the fencing issue. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for this gentleman? Mr. Troy? Appreciate that.
Appreciate it.
Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this matter?
We have Kurt Stetzer, followed by Dennis Callahan.
If you'd like to move up to the podium?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kurt Stitzer, for the record. In full transparency, I'm here to speak on behalf of the applicant in support of the project as the owner of Realm Constructors, who is the development partner in the project, but also as a just member of the public. I was the developer and am current owner of the Eddy, which is a beer garden in downtown Reno. We faced a very uphill battle through getting a special use permit to get that project open. And we faced every single protest, every what-if scenario, every single, there's gonna be fights and drunk driving and on and on and on, violence, et cetera. None of that has come to fruition. A lot of these concerns that we're hearing from the community in opposition to this are worst-case scenarios that if you design a good facility, you have a responsible operator managing and running the facility, that a lot of this stuff is talk. It's worst-case scenario, speculative concerns. So I have faith in Mr. De La Montaña. I have been to his wineries. I know how he operates his business, and I truly believe that this will be a good asset to the community in the region of Reno that it's at, but also to our entire community as Washoe County at large. So I wanted to put that out there. I'm happy to address any specific issues that anybody has beyond what Dennis Troy has spoken about, but from my perspective of having gone through this and having a beer garden that was a contentious issue that has proven to be a valuable asset to our community, so far as that the city of Reno has actually extended my operating hours and has removed a lot of the conditions to my special use permit because of how that has operated and the benefit that they have recognized to the community. I think that this is a very similar product, a very similar project, and I'm in full support of it.
Thank you. Madam Secretary?
Next, we have Dennis Callahan, followed by Ina Katzman.
Good afternoon. My name is Dennis Callahan. I live at 16920 Montrose Highway. I'm not immediately adjacent to this property, but I'm near. I really am encouraged by some of the changes that they've made regarding the hours and the volume, that type of thing. My question to you, because I don't know the answer, is if this is approved based on what they're saying they're going to do now, if they decide at a later date that they want to change the hours because maybe business is good and they want to expand it, would they have to come back for additional approval, or is that part of the condition if they say they're going to be closed at 6? Is that part of the condition and they would have to come back for a change? Also, when the Lodge Coffee and Wine Bar was approved, they put in some very significant outdoor lighting for their parking lot, which was very bright, and there was light pollution in the neighborhood. They said that they did that because it was a requirement of Washoe County, part of this process. And I would like to know whether or not there is going to be outdoor lighting for their parking lot. If there is, we need to know the volume of that lighting. Also, with the wine and bar at the Lodge, they came back and requested a permit for a boutique license so that they could have outdoor music, amplified music. We strongly would be against any outdoor amplified music in the neighborhood. So as long as that's all part of the approval process, and as long as the applicant doesn't have the ability to say, okay, well, we have now changed, we want to go from instead of closing at 6 o'clock, we now want to close at 9 o'clock, whether or not we need to be comfortable with, they would have to come back through an approval process for that. So other than that, I think they've done, a good job as far as trying to work with the neighborhood, but we want to make sure that the approval that is, if it's done, is based on what they've told you, and it's more or less in cement, and would have to go through a change process if they change their rules.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Callahan, I usually just let people speak with what they have to say, but to answer your question, they would have to follow the rules and conditions set forth that are approved by the board if in fact this is approved. If they wish to then change those conditions, they do have to come back to the board and have to be heard again for addition.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Callahan, I would also like to address your lighting concern. Those lighting issues are addressed in the operating conditions and the conditions of approval. And I remember specifically the permit that you're talking about. Those are supposed to conform with dark sky standards, and there's not supposed to be light spillage onto other properties. If there is, that is a code enforcement matter, and you need to contact Washoe County Code Enforcement and have them come out and deal with it.
Okay, great.
Because they are not in conformance with the permit if that is happening.
Okay, great.
And I would encourage you to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Madam Secretary?
Next is Ina Katzman, followed by Dorothy McDonald.
My name is Ina Katzman. I am a Montreux resident. I am very concerned about the traffic on Bordeaux. There are many, many days when we have to stand online to get into Montreux. I'm concerned about the traffic from coming out of this winery, and if they're going to continue past 4 o'clock when the buses are there. There are over 150 students, children, under the age of 18 in Montreux. And those children who are younger are going to be going into elementary school shortly. So maybe that's 6 children who are in school now, that's going to be doubled or tripled. We're getting a lot of families who are coming from California with young children, and I think that really should be taken into consideration. Also, now I'm going to forget what I wanted to say. For the fencing for this winery, we have moles, voles, and rabbits. So not only do we have to worry about the high fencing, but we have to worry about fencing below ground, because those rabbits and the moles and the voles will go underground and get into where the winery is. And I would love for you to table this whole conversation until every single person who lives in Montreux has a chance to understand exactly what this winery is going to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Dorothy McDonald, followed by Rebecca Wolf.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I find it interesting that I am from Montreux, I'm a Montreux resident, I live on Bordeaux. And that all of the homeowners that are right at the beginning, that are outside of Montreux, impacted by this, have signed off on the CCNRs and have given their approval. I just wondered if they were compensated in any way for this, and if there is any possibility that Mr. De La Montoya would then purchase those properties and expand this winery. That's one of my comments. The other one is bears are an issue in Montreux. They aren't a possibility, they are definitely an issue. And we have people behind us that have vineyards, not vineyards, but orchards, and they are quite heavily impacted by the bears. A vineyard would be quite an invitation to a bear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Rebecca Wolf, followed by Judy Collins.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Wolf, and I too live in Montreux. My initial and largest concern, obviously, is about traffic, because I go in and out of the community on Bordeaux more often than not when the school bus is dropping off or picking up. And cars are parked on the sides. The bus does not always go into that cul-de-sac and turn around and park. So often, there is a single lane to accommodate traffic going out to Mount Rose Highway or coming into Bordeaux from Mount Rose Highway. And there are mothers and strollers and dogs and children all over the street. And I have witnessed accidents that have been almost occurred because somebody wasn't paying attention. And so now we are adding the possibility of people who have had, I mean, they said 4 to 8 different samples of different wines are possible, and a sample usually is 1 ounce. So I'll take 5 of those samples and then drive away. And it concerns me. I appreciate the fact that they have changed their hours of operation, but their by-appointment hours are absolutely right when the children are there and the school buses, and people congregate early because that happens to be an area where the families meet and talk and wait for their children. So the concern about traffic increase is a great one for me. I also have a concern about the fact of the numbers of trucks they are saying will come in and go out annually. At the CAB meeting, we were told that that acre of land would provide 25% of the grapes necessary. So where is the rest of it coming from? It's coming from either their vineyards in California or they're purchasing it or whatever, but that 25% is on site, but all of the other materials have to come in. And I find it a little suspect also that at the CAB meeting, the owner was asked about the availability of people purchasing wine and opening it and drinking it on premises. And the owner said it used to be against the law in California, but they changed that law, so now in California, you can buy wine at a winery and tasting room and imbibe on premises. But I find it a little disingenuous that the owner did not know what the regulation is in Nevada. And that also is a concern of mine. Yeah, maybe people who have great tolerance for liquor will drink their, 4 or 5 tastes and be fine. But if you're buying a bottle and imbibing it there with snacks that we've learned now are going to be on premises, that concerns me. And that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wolf.
Next is Judy Collins, followed by Dennis de la Montaña.
My name is Judy Collins. I live in Montreux. There are some unanswered questions in my mind that I'm sure Mr. de la Montaña would love to help me with. One is, I'm sure that access directly to Mount Rose must have been considered at some point, because this would then make that winery very, very simple without worrying about the congestion and trafficking in the Montreux entrance. And looking at the map, it looked like there could be a road built directly to Mount Rose Highway, which would lead me to think that very nice signage could be put on Mount Rose Highway. Now I don't know where the signage for the winery would be. So that has me, I hear signage for school bus, but I don't know where signage is for winery. I also have a question about the hours by appointment or the hours closing on the weekend. Hours by appointment is at 4:30. Does that mean at 4:30 doors close? Or does that mean that's the last appointment? If somebody is sitting on this wonderful patio having their glass of wine and it's 4:30, is it time now to close the door or to finish your drink? I'd like to know how many people are sitting on the patio. I would like to know hours of appointment, how many appointments is he going to have, and also how many people would he be able to help at one time? Because that's called traffic. So now we're back to traffic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Dennis Della Montaigne.
Hi, my name is Dennis Della Montaigne. I'm the applicant. There was a lot of questions raised that I probably could answer. I tried to take some notes. Probably didn't do a very good job, but I'll kind of randomly go through here. Fence. I've never grown grapes where there's bears. A lot of deer, a lot of predators, raccoons, you name it. We've had to deal with it. So I've been looking to the community to find out what type of fence we could put there. We know we want an open fence. We may have to do hot wire. We know we're going to have to get dogs. This is going to be, it's obviously going to be a struggle. We're going to be looking for, people that have a lot more experience than we do. So I don't want to come up and tell you the type of fence we're going to do because I really don't know. I just know it's going to be trial and error, and we're going to try to figure it out. We do know that dogs are a detriment, and that's something that will be considered. But we want to keep, the neighbors don't want to see a solid fence, so we want to accommodate them also. And we partner with them in this process, and we want to make sure we don't deviate from that and put some large wall against us and the neighbors. Equipment, small equipment. You operate, Mr. Lee, I think you operate a farm. Well, our equipment is about the size of a John Deere 33,000 series. It's probably 4 feet wide by 6 feet long. That's all we use. That's all we can get in. Our rows are going to be probably 6 by 8. There's no backhoe types equipment. It all can be, it's basically with a roll bar about that tall, and that's all you get. And that's all the equipment you're going to have in there. Most of the work is 1 acre, will be done by hand. The spraying will be done by hand. All the other cultivation will be done by hand. So fencing off or screening a piece of equipment is probably no more than twice the size of a lawn tractor. Food, somebody asked about food. We did not ask for it, we did not apply for a commercial kitchen. It's not my desire to create a food environment. However, wine, when you pair wine with cheese and food, it tastes better. So our intent is to probably look for some cheeses or some small crackers or small bites to be able to pair with our wine to be able to have a quality tasting experience. I don't know what the Nevada requirements are. You did see that we are the first ones to be applied in Washoe County. We have a lot of things that we need to get up to speed on, and it's going to be a lot of trial by error. We talk about vehicle trips per day. We are being pretty aggressive in how many people will show up. This is not a bar, it's a tasting room. People are going to come there, taste a few wines. They may enjoy the environment, sit in the backyard. Whether we serve a full bottle of wine or a glass of wine is going to be dependent on. I have a few more minutes because I was trying to address all these questions.
We'll cycle one more time through. We'll give you another 3.
We'll let the environment and our customers and our community and our neighborhood dictate how this ultimately proceeds. Where we want to establish some boundaries in terms of the hours in the school, and how they impact the school bus. We're looking at that. Our core hours can be 11 to 6. We're not open when the kids go to school. We're not open. We're closed. So there's no impact when they go to school. When they come home from school, during the week, there's going to be some impact. And that impact, we're told, is right around 3:30, roughly. So what we'll do is we'll still be open from 11 to 6 by appointment from 11 to 6. However, that hour that we know school or kids are arriving, we will very be conscientious in terms of the appointments we take. We may see 20 people, because 20 people may show up in a limo, but that's one vehicle trip. So what we do, you can have 20 people show up in 10 cars. So we just have to be conscientious, our staff has to be conscientious, that look, in this 1 hour, let's reduce the conflict between us and the children, And that's probably better than a lot of other businesses have done up in Montreux. I've seen, there's thousands of people come out of there in golf tournaments and stuff like that, and there doesn't seem to be any consideration to the traffic or the kids. So, Mount Rose access. We don't have Mount Rose access. That is a private easement that we don't have access to. We would have to buy access to. It is not wide enough. I'd love to have Mount Rose access. It's not an option. It's not even close to an option, unless we buy somebody's house and tear it down. Again, our hours are 65% of our hours are non-conflict with the kids. Again, we're not located in Montreux, so everyone complains about us, the influence to Montreux. You can't even see us from Montreux. You can't even see us from the entrance to Montreux. On the backside of Montreux, the meadow can see us. All our direct neighbors support us. The people who are involved in Montreux support us. I'm talking about the ownership. Our facility is smaller than most residents in Montreux. Real estate value history, I'm an appraiser, been an appraiser for 30 years. Wineries and vineyards do not diminish values of properties. I can absolutely 100% tell you that with all bit of authority, because I've been there, I appraised them. They add value. We only have 2 full-time employees, not 4, by the way. That's, I think I hit on all bases. Did I miss something, you guys? Did some of you had some questions that I missed? Well, the last thing I say is we've worked for 3 years trying to find a piece of property that would accommodate what the county wanted. Very, very difficult. Yes, there's better areas in which we can grow grapes, but there isn't a better area that accommodates the other issues. City water, city sewer, ingress and egress, not through a residential subdivision. We don't go through a residential subdivision to get to our project. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have one more I just noticed up there. Melinda Lister.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to,
Could you state your name for the record?
yes, it's Melinda Lister, and I have 4 children, and I do live in Montreux. And I wanted to address the concern about the traffic. I feel as though Montreux and the surrounding properties have been successful in routing children in and out with security guards at the base of Montreux and that pathway going in and out of Bordeaux. And so I just wanted to address that. I feel that I can speak for having 4 children and walking through that property and seeing it, that it's an opportunity to perhaps address how the bus stop is set up, but that's not necessarily an issue on a day in and day out. As a parent of 4 children today that goes in and out of Montreux a lot, I have a 17-year-old driver and a 16-year-old driver. I feel like there's greater concerns that could be addressed in a different forum than this. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, is there anyone else?
We have no further public comment.
Okay, we will close public comment, and we will take a, 6-minute break, as we have some documents, I believe, that have been worked on for conditions and that we need to review. So 6 minutes. There will be copies of the amended conditions or suggestions on the back table if you wish to look at them and review them. They will be available to all of you. All right, we're about ready to go again. Trevor, we about ready? About ready? Gentlemen, ready? Okay, we'll bring this meeting back to order. We have closed public comment, therefore we will bring it back to the board to discuss. Any discussion on this topic, on this item? Mr. Stanley?
The applicant, I think, has done, and associated folks have done an excellent job in trying to address the community issues. I, however, am looking at the package that I spent, as I'm sure everyone else did, a lot of time analyzing and going out to the site analyzing, and it's not a very good match for, not a perfect match, obviously, for what we've been hearing in terms of the operation and so forth. Then we receive, and I don't think we ever did count them, but either 6 or 7 changes here, all of which, some of which are good, some of which may not be good, but I know that it's difficult, from my standpoint, as a Board of Adjustment member, to analyze this in the 5 or 6 minutes that we had available there, or even here. And since this is, and it's been pointed out, the first time for an effort like this on new code, and there was a mention of trial and error and trying to adjust it to kind of fit and work. And I understand that, but I have great concerns about the error part of trial and error. And it's our job, I think, in my opinion, to help reduce that and to work with planning to help reduce that. And getting late-breaking news of such an extent is very troubling to me. And would call typically for a continuance, or at least for me mentioning a continuance. But I don't know if you can do that on an AP, on an administrative permit, so.
Thank you. Mr. Toulouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In reading through the revised and proposed removed conditions, I still have questions about the wall or fence. And so I'd like to ask Mr. Bronchick to come back up to the dais or to the lectern and tell us exactly what that means.
Okay. Chris with planning. So before I jump into those, I'm going to touch up on some of yours. So there's a number of these that were added that are above and beyond. So 1K and 1L, 1M7 and 1M8. Those are above and beyond, and those specific conditions came after the staff report was published, and those were in a direct response to the public. Now to your question, so 1G states that a wall or fence that is required to be constructed between the commercial uses and the adjacent residential uses. It shall be constructed of long-lasting materials, shall be at least 6 feet in height. The wall shall be constructed out of stone, masonry, vinyl, or composite. Hedgerows would also be permitted. Wood and chain link are not permitted. So first and foremost, I added that wood and chain link are not permitted. One, the chain link I didn't think was in character with a winery, and wood in our climate is very hard to maintain and very expensive to maintain. And if it's not maintained, it looks dilapidated, run down, and it wouldn't be ideal. That being said, we do have a number of public that did comment on fence, and that is great. However, as a planner, my job is to mitigate potential impacts on neighboring properties. And so while the immediate neighbors may approve of open fence, may want open fence, may want a view into this property, I chose not to touch this and to keep this in because the future landowners that purchase those properties may not like to see inside. So from staff's perspective, I do support the removal of the one tree every linear feet. I do not have an agricultural background, but I understand the grape growing aspect of things. And then I do support their amendment to change 1I from no outdoor storage to agricultural machinery and tools shall be screened from adjacent properties when not in use. I touched up on that within my presentation. As mentioned, I did work with code enforcement prior to this meeting, and they also did support this condition. But in terms of this entire document, the only one that staff does not support as of right now is 1G, the fence.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Chris, let me just clarify it in my own mind. At this point in time, and I'm thinking, I agree with you, is that we should not remove condition 1G. We should keep condition 1G for the reasons that you stated. And I agree with that. The question is what does that end up looking like? And that's where we may have to go with it. But I'm in favor of leaving 1G as it is. Thank you, Chris.
Let me step in here real quick, and Mr. Lloyd, maybe you can help me. There are several potential changes on conditions, either adding or removing. And as such, I don't know as a board whether we should address them one at a time, whether we're in favor of them or we're not, or whether we take this in its totality with the add and delete and then come forward with conditions. I'm leaning more toward we ought to address each one of these individually to see if in fact we're in favor or not as a board as a whole, and either accept or reject them one at a time on their face value before we vote on its entirety as to either approve or deny this project. So I'd like some discussion on that, either amongst the board members or Mr. Lloyd. Any comments? Ms. Hill?
Yeah, I don't even understand what add engineering 3B is. What is that? There's only 3A. I don't know what 3B is.
So in my presentation, I did mention, unfortunately, I wasn't able to track that down right away, but engineering did add an additional amended condition. That condition is specific to an access easement. I received that condition 15 minutes before the meeting.
Okay. Do we have it written down somewhere?
I do not believe so. I can,
Engineering.
it's not on the presentation. I can send it to. And then the second one was that Parks would like to remove their condition completely. Yes.
Yes, I understand that. That's easy. But 3B, I don't know where it is.
Yeah, we need clarification on what 3B is under engineering. I don't see it anywhere.
Engineering capital improvement projects. Maybe it's right in here. Oh, well, I don't know. No, it wouldn't be here.
Can I read the engineering condition to you?
Is that on Exhibit B?
It is not on Exhibit B. I did not have a chance to print it, I apologize, but I can read it to you.
I can see it.
No, it's not that one.
Oh, it's not this one. Okay.
So the condition that I received right before the meeting was from engineering, and it is the following language. The proposed access road from Bordeaux Drive has an open offer of dedication to Washoe County. However, the offer has not been accepted since no permanent roadway has been constructed at this time. A privately owned and maintained access roadway conforming to Washoe County Code 110 to serve the development will be permitted upon the recordation of a private access easement along the proposed roadway. Further, the private access easement shall not terminate or remove the existing offers of dedication provided on parcel map number 3092 and document number 1926933. The applicant shall prepare engineering design drawings for the proposed roadway construction with hydrology report and submit to Washoe County for a grading building permit. So that's engineering 2B.
Just one second, Mr. Stanley. Do you have copies of that for the
I
board?
don't, I read it off my phone.
Can we get copies of that for the board members and also for the public? Is that possible?
You may need to take another recess, but yes.
Mr. Chair, yeah, I would recommend if we're going to do that, let's take another brief recess.
Well, I'd rather have a hard copy that I can look at myself instead of trying to remember what was said. But before we take a recess, let me here's my concern as chair is this is, to me, it's getting more and more convoluted instead of getting clearer. There's several changes that have been added. There's been comments from the public. I do appreciate the applicant's willingness to work with the public and make those changes, but to vote on this, I don't have a clear grasp and understanding of everything that's been presented as of yet. And that being said, I would find it difficult for me to actually even vote on a situation like this without having a clear understanding of exactly what I'm voting on. So again, it gets back to, we have a couple options here. We can go through each one of these items. We can take another recess and get engineer item 3B. We can then go through each one of these items before we vote in its entirety. I know there's a bad word out there, but there's also a continuance if we want to look at that. So if we do that, we'll have one document that has everything laid out for us, and then we can go ahead and vote on that in the future. But that's where I'm at right now. I'm struggling with some of this. Mr. Toulouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As much as I am reticent of continuances, I would agree with you that in this particular instance, it may be the best course of action to ask the applicant to ask us for a continuance. Because it is, we've got so many changes on so many pieces of paper that it's difficult to put it into the appropriate slot so that we can understand it. So, Mr. Chair, I would support your efforts in that direction.
Thank you.
It should come as no surprise that I support your thinking on this as well. And one of the kind of reasons for that is this document is published, right? It's online, and people who are interested read it. And I don't know how many people will have a chance to read one of the reports that came in at 1:21 today. So in order for us to consider it, we need all the data, and it gives everybody, I think, a better chance to make their adjustments. But the other thing it does is allows the public who's reading these to have some idea what's going on.
Good point. Any other comments? Mr. Lawrence?
Yeah, I'll side with the board here on the continuance thing, if that's what you guys want to do. I understand what Chris read, the engineering aspect of the road, the permitting and whatnot being done, but, and regarding what Mr. Stanley said, I do kind of agree. In all fairness to those who haven't had a chance to review this, they should have an opportunity to look at this and examine it and see where they fall in their opinions of it. So I would go with the board. They want it to continue.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence.
I agree.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Mr. Lloyd, for the continuance, first of all, we have a discussion going on out in the audience. I guess there's a couple ways we can handle this. We can vote on this as a board right now. The problem is we don't have a clear understanding. And all I can do is speak for myself, but if I don't have a clear understanding of what I'm going to be voting on, I'll probably vote against it. Okay? And that's just me. I'm not speaking for anyone else that sits up here. To be fair, though, to be afforded an opportunity to have a continuance so all the information is again presented and we're all on the same page, I think that would be advantageous to everybody on all sides. With that being said, if the applicant or his representative would like to come back to the table and have a discussion about that, we'd be willing to do that.
Thank you again, Dennis Troy, for the record. We did just have a quick discussion. I think it's a lot simpler than we think it might be. Trevor and I were just talking about laying out each one of the conditions and walking through them. That would, ideally, that's what we would like to do and get this taken care of. I think that between staff and myself, I think that we could go through each one of the conditions, explain the changes within them, and then help you make an educated decision. prime example would be the fencing. The only thing that has changed in Chris's condition is to add an allowance to use a transparent predator-resistant fence in it. What that looks like remains to be determined.
Can- Mr. Toulouse, if I could please just make a comment.
Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Lawrence, go ahead.
Perhaps this is something that the Department of Wildlife should be consulted on for their expertise in this matter, and you come back to the meeting with their suggestions of a predator-proof fence and what they would approve. That's my only comment.
Okay. Mr. Toulouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in wholehearted agreement with Mr. Lawrence, not because they're my former employer, but that's, I believe, the way to go about the fencing issue. And on top of that, so now we're adding another condition that's not in the conditions, that's on a separate piece of paper, and I've got 4 or 5 separate pieces of paper with different conditions and different additions that don't line up with what was presented in the staff report. And to me, you know, it's a problem. And I'm not sitting out there in the audience, I'm up here, and I'm confused. So I would have to go with the chairman. I think even if we walked through each one of these conditions, condition by condition, I don't think it's fair to everyone in the audience to do that, because they don't have the same opportunity that we have with all of this presented to us. There are copies available to them in the back, except for that last condition you just added.
I'm just the first I've heard of it.
Okay, so, you know, I really would rather see us, I'd really rather see you seek a continuance, just for everyone's benefit. And I think it would go a long ways to keeping the neighbors happy, too.
Mr. Chair, if I may, if this is the direction of the board, if we can possibly consider a compromise, and that compromise being the fact that we're at that time of the year where we're meeting every 2 months now. Would this board consider a special meeting in September? And there's actually other items or items that we could fit on that agenda as well. Would this board consider a special meeting in September?
Yes.
Yes, I would.
Okay. Think that's unanimous?
Answer.
Okay, thank you.
You know, the other, I mean, now we're back to the board here, but there's a couple other issues that I still am not comfortable with. I mean, we keep talking about the fence, but, you know, the traffic issue, one, although the traffic engineer said it's not really an impact, they're looking at that on a very myopic scale. They're looking at this and how much traffic will occur. But we also had, right before this meeting, we had the children's cabinet, which is also taking place right there on Montrose, which is going to be which is a 4-day event, I believe, 3 or 4-day event. In addition to that, we had the Barracuda Golf Course. So when you look at it singular, it's not a big issue. But when you open it up and it's an actual business that's operating in conjunction with special events that occur and have to use that road to get in and out, it does become more of an issue. So I'm not truly convinced there that that's not a concern that we have. The access road is not signed off by Washoe County yet. I don't really have anything solid in that arena yet, which I would feel much better over if I had that. So there's more than one issue. There's still 140 potential homes that have to go up there, which would, of course, increase the amount of children. There's a school being built on Thomas Creek right now, which is going to be bringing probably busing children through that area. So that becomes another issue. So instead of looking here, we kind of have to look a little bit further. Taking some of that into account, in addition to the amount of paperwork I have sitting in front of me with adding conditions and removing conditions, you know, I'm not in a good position personally, I've already stated this, to rule in favor of this project at this time. However, if the applicant isn't in favor of a continuance, We can go through these one at a time, and we can address them, and we'll make a determination. Mr. Lawrence?
Mr. Chair, one thing I just wanted to, for my own edification, I don't golf. I mean, I've never golfed before in my life. Do they serve beer and wine at golf courses? Are you allowed to have those beverages there? Or the children's cabinet, are they allowed to have beer and wine at these events where these people are driving past this exact spot where alcohol may have been consumed or served in a different venue? And then should we be looking at those as well, if they're going to be doing that? I mean, I'm not sure where our responsibility begins and ends with this, with the consumption of alcohol and pedestrian and children, and what goes on behind those gates there at Montreux. So can somebody give me some edification on that?
I think Mr. Toulouse will.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, I've been a member of this board for a really long time. And what we all have to remember, and not to put down in any way your thought of thinking globally, Mr. Chairman, I think that's a great idea, and we probably all should be thinking globally, and the code should be thinking globally as well. But our task is this case. What is in the staff report for this case, and we all have our personal biases and thoughts and feelings that can weigh in on our decisions on this case, but it's not our job as a board to think of the other cases and bring them here.
Well, no, I wanted a comparison of opinions between a winery operating with 20 guests and the Barracuda Championship being released and people leaving the golf course at all times of the day. My question simply is, and I don't know the answer, do they serve beer and wine at golf courses? Does anybody know that? I don't know that. They do. Okay, so people leaving the golf course at all times of the day, beer and wine. And how about these special event things? Do they serve beer and wine at them?
Yes, there is a cocktail
Okay.
tent.
There's a cocktail tent, that's what I thought. So, okay, I just kind of needed, as you said, a larger picture, Mr. Chair, a larger picture of what goes on in the area with the events and whatnot. So I have that now. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stanley?
Again, I agree with the chair saying that we can walk through every one of these changes. And again, the chair mentioned it'll be tough for the audience. The other thing I want to kind of underscore is that this original document is online for people in the community to review. And that's what they're deciding on, and that's what they're responding to. And that's what sort of was presented at the CAB when people were giving their opinions there. And it's called the Citizens Advisory Board. So some of the advice was taken. And with all these new additions and changes, it seems that I would again echo the chair when he says, and I'm going to paraphrase, the thing that's on the paper in front of us doesn't reflect what's going on. It doesn't reflect very well the intentions now that they've been changed. And because of that, if we had to vote on what's the phrase now, within the four corners, it's going to be tough to come up with a yes on that. It's been, we don't suggest, but it's certainly been mentioned about, and I'll add to it, that a continuance would be very beneficial to the applicant, to planning, and to the community. Otherwise, we'll hack through these and do the best we can.
Thank you, Mr. Stanley. Any further comment?
The applicant has to request a continuance, isn't that correct?
Well, I believe so, but I was going to defer that to Mr. Lloyd, whether we as the board can ask for a continuance, because we don't believe that we have enough information in front of us to make a sound decision.
Right, and it's my understanding through legal and their advice that yes, it's the purview of this board to request the continuance of the applicant.
We can do that?
You can request
request the applicant.
Yes, their agreement with the condition, with the
Right.
continuance.
And if the applicant elects not to, then we'll make a ruling on it.
Then you'll have to make a decision, yea or nay,
Okay.
on the request.
And I believe we've heard from the applicant, you're not willing to continue this for 1 month till everything is,
I think that Mr. Lloyd and I had chatted, I think that it wouldn't take that much time just to go through. I'm not sure even what you guys are looking at. I mean, I know that you've been handed, different pieces of paper with several different conditions on it. But at the same time, in the essence of, we've got a lot of time wrapped up into this, and we would really prefer that we take the time to go through this. We're here now. I don't see it taking that much longer to go through those conditions and read through them.
okay, with that being said, then what we're going to do is we're going to take another recess for about another 6 minutes. Chris, you're gonna have to produce that 3B engineering condition for us to have, and for the public to have also. So we're in recess for about, sorry.
Could you make it a little longer, since we're going to be here for a while?
Sure, we can come back at 4 o'clock. That'll give 7 minutes. How about that?
All right, great, thank you.
Huh? We're going to go straight up or straight down? We're going to go straight up or straight down. Okay, good. Perfect. And I'll mention it. Perfect.
We're going to what?
I want to let the public.
It's fair.
Right. Well, you're so right. If they want to propose a clear,
right.
fence, it's like, what? No.
It's 4 o'clock.
None of the agency have had a chance
Do we want
to
to
review it.
get these gentlemen back in, or do we care? If not, I'm just going to go and, all right, here we go. Bringing this meeting back to order. We are having a discussion amongst the board members as to this agenda item. Any more discussion or any further discussion on this? I will go first. I think, here is my concern. I think we have numerous proposals on the board, or before us, that makes it a little bit difficult for all of us to really dissect this and figure out what we want or what we agree with or we don't agree with. I have a real concern that the public has really not had an opportunity to look a lot of these items over. It's been mostly between staff, the board, and the applicant. And I think that the public in general should have an opportunity to have some input or review documentation, so they are aware also, since this is a public meeting. That's where I'm coming from on this. Any other discussion?
I'd like
Ms. Hill?
to add, not only the public, but other agencies, like the Department of Wildlife, or engineering, or, schools, or whatever. I mean, I think they should also have an opportunity to weigh in on what's being proposed that has changed since the documents were distributed.
Thank you. Any other? Mr. Stanley?
Once again, I'd like to echo what you're saying, and I just want to make sure that the applicant is hearing us when we say that we would look kindly if you were to ask for a continuance, and that we were willing to have an exceptional meeting next month, a different schedule, to expedite your concerns, particularly on a one-off, the first time ever, and what I think is a great project, and to get it bolted down, get all the community support that I think you'll get by, in my opinion, by accommodating as much as you have. And so I would, again, echo the chair's recommendation that you seriously consider a continuance.
Any further discussion? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Toulouse?
Overall, I like the project. I like the idea of Washoe County having a winery. I think it's great. However, that being said, I'm having to echo the chair's concerns and Mr. Stanley's concerns, and I have real issues making a decision based on inconsistent information. I don't know what we have here. It's not very orderly or consistent, and I can't make a really informed decision based on what we have here. So I'm just echoing your concerns, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any further comment? With that, what I will accept from this board is a straight yes. I will go ahead and allow the applicant to.
Thank you very much. So I'm hearing what you guys are saying. The reason I pushing this because I didn't get a feel for the direction. Like I said, this is the first time one has been presented to you. I don't know if, as a board, that you have an aversion to this project. or you have a general acceptance. So always looking for, from the board, and thank you very much for Kim expressing, say, hey, I don't have a problem with the project, I just need the details need to be fine-tuned. That's always looking for. I am, as applicant, in favor of you making a continuance, but that's the feedback that I was looking from the board. And I'll let,
Thank you. For the record, Dennis Troy. I think that Dennis just explained our stance, which is kind of why we were sitting back there sticking our hands up before this thing went to vote. We had a chance to talk about it. We had a chance to consult with staff. We too agree that you need to sit down with a bulleted list of conditions, not flip from one page to another, read through them succinctly. There is a little bit of reservation that this thing can snowball from an applicant standpoint. So that's where our reservation was coming from, that we'd like to have you go through them now, but we do understand that. So moving forward, we are willing to accept a continuance. We are grateful that you would schedule a meeting in September. As a land use planner for almost 13 years, I've seen these things just continue down the road for a number of years, so we're grateful for that. If you need any additional information from us, we are certainly willing to provide that. You have my contact information. In closing, we are willing to continue this hearing. I don't want this to belabor it. We can all get out of here at a reasonable hour. So, thank you.
So just for clarification, Mr. Troy, you as a representative from the applicant, you're asking for a continuance, and we can go ahead and schedule you for September, I believe. Is that right, Mr. Lloyd? We can get him on there? If you're willing to do that and come back before us in September.
Should I say I do? That is correct, Mr. Chair Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll bring it back to the board then. The applicant has asked for a continuance. I see no problem. I guess we will vote on it. With that, I'll accept the motion for a continuance. Mr. Toulouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to continue administrative permit case number WADMIN 19, I forgot my glasses, so 0015, oh no, wait, that's the wrong one.
4.
Let me start over. Where is it? Like I said, I don't have my glasses.
Want to try mine?
Yeah, let me see. Where is the,
Here.
oh, there. Okay. All right. I move to continue case WADMIN 19-0014 De La Montaña Winery to the September meeting, September 5th?
Well, we don't have that set in stone yet. It will be around.
To the meeting, the special meeting that has yet to be set in September.
Thank you.
Second that.
Second, Mr. Stanley seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on. Number 9, planning item. Presentation from Planning and Building Division staff. Which provide information regarding the sphere of influence. Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm Trevor Lloyd with Planning and Building. And at a previous meeting, I was asked to give a brief presentation on the sphere of influences in Washoe County. And those are for both the cities of Reno and Sparks. Let's see, does this work? Yeah, we spend a good deal of our time as planners dealing with this particular issue, and it came to my attention that the Board of Adjustment was not necessarily up to speed on what, in fact, the implications of sphere of influence and the exertion of extraterritorial jurisdiction are, particularly for residents of this county. What you see on the overhead are a bunch of colors and the maps. The color in red represents the city of Reno, and the bluish color is the city of Sparks. Now, this is a map of the sphere of influence for both of those jurisdictions, and it lives within the regional plan. So any changes to a sphere of influence would require a regional plan amendment. Now, what you see is the darker areas, shaded in both red, darker red and darker blue. Those are the areas that are sphere of influence only, and they do not represent, they're not areas that have been annexed yet by either of the cities. And so they're in a bit of a no man's land. And it's been a bit of a concern or a struggle for staff of both cities when you have situations that come up in terms of who has jurisdiction and what does that really mean for the people that have to live in these areas. We have two interlocal agreements, one with the City of Reno and one with City of Sparks. Reno's was signed in 2003, Sparks shortly after in 2004. The cities, this may exercise what's called their extraterritorial jurisdiction, and that's established in NRS 278010 through 278630, and those give the powers for exerting that extraterritorial jurisdiction. Now, as part of the interlocal agreements, we've established different responsibilities within those SOIs. So as you can see on the overhead, Reno's responsibilities when it comes to those areas that are within the SOI, Reno is responsible for issuing building permits, issuing new discretionary applications. That could be a special use permit, a variance, a tentative map, anything that requires essentially a public hearing would have to go through the City of Reno's process. That also includes Washoe County approved projects from the past within those areas and establishing planning standards. That is all the responsibility of the City of Reno. Washoe County's responsibility is basically business license, code enforcement, and to a lesser degree, some engineering work as well. Let's look at, it's a little different with the City of Sparks. In the City of Sparks, they will process new discretionary applications and establish planning standards. However, building permits need to come through Washoe County. So you can see where it gets a little confusing for mom and pop that wants to come down and get a building permit. Well, the building permit comes to Washoe County, but it has to go to the City of Sparks for planning review. So it's a bit cumbersome. Also, Washoe County is responsible for discretionary applications that were processed while the property was in the Washoe County. Washoe County is also responsible for both business license and code enforcement for all the areas of the Sparks sphere of influence. As I indicated, there's some challenges that have to be overcome with these areas of the sphere of influence. Again, it creates some confusion with the residents. I mean, who's providing the service? Who do I talk to? What is my zoning, for example? One of the interesting things with the sphere of influence is the cities adopt a master plan, so they have an underlying master plan land use for that area, but they don't adopt a zoning category, so they go back to Washoe County's old zoning category. So it gets a little confusion. There's confusion with staff as well. Sometimes we have to figure out whose services are, who's providing the services. And it's, many times it's case by case. You may have an old ag pit, for example, where Washoe County has historically provided all of the processing, but now it's inside one of the cities, and the cities will say, okay, since you have, go ahead and continue processing applications. Enforcing codes can be very problematic because you have Washoe County code enforcement essentially enforcing City of Sparks or City of Reno regulations. Also, there's certain services that there's some confusion about. Well, who's providing that service? A boundary line adjustment, a reversion of acreage. So kind of work that out as we go. There are two processes. One where you have property going from Washoe County into one of the cities. In that instance, there's a transition period where you have to determine a certain zoning category, and there are translation tables that live within the regional plan in terms of what is the appropriate or closest master plan to assign. Also, immediately following that inclusion into a sphere of influence, the cities would process a master plan amendment, so they would master plan the land use. Conversely, sometimes the cities roll back their areas of sphere of influence. In this case, we do a similar thing. We use the translation tables to determine the most appropriate master plan and zoning, and then immediately on those heels, we process master plan amendment and regulatory zone amendment. Just for some information, there have been a number of rollbacks. This one is a rollback of the sphere of influence that was in the city of Sparks. This is all that area in the East Truckee Canyon. It was rolled back into Washoe County's jurisdiction. That happened about 7, 8 years ago. About 3 or 4 years ago, there were a number of rollbacks through the city of Reno. There was one in Verdi, North Valley's the Grandview Terrace, and one in the southwest, Truckee Meadows. And so we do have, we've seen in the recent past more rollbacks than we have seen, in fact, acquiring from the cities of SOI land. So we do have a process for that. Keep in mind when the cities decide to annex or take areas of SOI into their jurisdiction, the county really doesn't have an official say. We basically have to accommodate. Same thing when they roll back that land. We can't say, no, we can't take it. By NRS state law, we're required to take the land back. So hopefully that answers a lot of your questions. However, I'm available if you have any additional questions.
Mr. Toulouse.
Just a couple of real quick ones, Trevor. One, what determines whether a property is eligible to be in the sphere of influence? Is it the fact that the city may annex that property in the future? So as an example, where I live in Mogul is not in the sphere of influence. My neighbors a block away are in the sphere of influence, even though they're in the county. And the reason why is that my understanding is the potential is that the city could annex those properties without the property owner's permission. And in the development area, it would require a vote of 50% of the homeowners.
That's true. Typically, what you find is voluntary annexation, voluntary by the property owner's consent. It's the much simpler process. However, there is the rare exception where there is an involuntary, I guess, sphere of influence or annexation. But typically, what's required is that there has to be some connection, right? You can't do this leapfrog jurisdiction, city of Reno or city of Sparks.
And then my second question is the code enforcement piece of that. So as you stated, it's very confusing for people who in the SOI because they don't know who is supposed, what code, are they city code or are they county code? And the county is then responsible for enforcing those codes.
Correct.
And so I'm just pointing out it's an issue, I guess. I don't really have a question on it.
It requires some coordination on the part of the county and the cities to make sure that we're imposing the correct codes and standards. But
I guess I do have a question.
Sure.
So whose code is it that gets enforced? The county's code or the city's code?
That's a good question, and I really wish that code enforcement staff was here to answer that specifically. But my understanding is that they utilize county's zoning. And so in that regard, we would look at county code requirements. However, there is some nuance to that, so I'll leave it at that.
Who has primacy is what you're
Mr. Lloyd, quick question. Why would a city do a rollback? What would be the reasons for that?
I think
But usually they want to expand again.
with a lot of these rollbacks, it becomes very evident that the properties within their jurisdiction, they're just not able to serve them, at least not to their specified standards. And for that reason, they at one point they thought maybe this was a good idea, but then they realized that it's not getting the specific municipal services that they originally intended.
So do the cities then have the opportunity basically to annex higher value properties then away from the county?
That is a possibility, yes. Yeah.
And lesser value or of no value they can return?
I don't know that I would put it in those terms, but that's probably very accurate, yeah.
That's a sweet deal.
Yeah.
And then just one last question. The city of Reno, as you're moving on Virginia Street in the city of Reno, the city of Reno wants that to be high density. What they want to do is they want more transportation through buses and things like that. But just past that property line, then you get into the county, which might be, you know, LDS and things like that. So how do they coordinate that, or do they not? I mean, does one agency just make a decision that, you know, we're gonna go high density here and, you know, 500 yards back or wherever the property line is, it's rural, or what?
Right, a lot of that coordination happens at regional planning. And with the update to the regional plan, you establish these patterns of development where you want the high density, high intensity development, and where you want the lower density. That really gets established at that point. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Stanley?
Mr. Lloyd, I was in a meeting this last week where a development was being discussed, and roadways which were being, every project has its own view of the roadway. And so you have 4 or 5 of them, and each one of them only has a certain amount of traffic, so don't worry about it, and don't worry about this one, and don't worry about this one, and don't worry about this one, right? But these particular developments needed a water tank on a very mountainous 40-acre parcel. And it was drawn in and so forth. And someone asked, well, what are we going to do about that? And the offhand comment was, well, we'll just annex it. And I thought, okay, fine, but how long will that take? What is the timing? How long does it take? Assuming the cause is just blah, 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 blah. Everybody agrees. What is the time frame on an annexation of, say, a 40-acre parcel or part of a 640 or something?
Right, and I do apologize for not being able, I'll say out front, I will not be able to answer that question.
Okay.
I know it's a time frame. I know it involves regional planning. Typically, that doesn't involve county staff. We're on the tail end of that. We'll comment, but in terms of the process, we're really not heavily involved with that process itself. Okay. So it's a city-driven process, and I can't tell you the time frame.
And one more peculiar one. As you know, I live in a place that has one parcel in the sphere and one parcel in the county, and that was by the Hester-Freund agreement.
Right.
2003, I think, as you pointed out. Theoretically, for tax purposes, for land, since it's that time, I noticed that they tend to be similar-ish. But is there any consideration, do you know, and this may be one, gee, Brad, I don't know, ask the tax guy. Is there any consideration in terms of property taxes, which go to the county, about whether a property is in the sphere, thereby considered more developable, I think is at least one of the rules they used to use, versus, or more densely developable, how's that? Versus something in the county which is not that.
Well, I know that the assessors, they take all of that into consideration when they're assessing the value of a property and what the potential value is, not just what the existing use value is on the property.
So the SY versus county probably would have an impact then somehow.
And I don't know what that formula entails, but it certainly is something that they look into with the assessors.
Thank you.
Any more questions for Mr. Lloyd? Thank you. Actually, that was very
Thank you.
informative. I appreciate
You bet.
that. Moving on, chair and board items. Future agenda items. Anybody have anything?
Maybe a brief one. Is this the area where sometimes we get an update on what the BCC has done with the suggestions we've made or our rulings and so forth? Is that something we need to agendize, or is that a standard?
That's a standard thing that we'll be getting down to in just a minute here.
Okay.
I guess, is this where I would bring that point up to Mr. Lloyd?
Yeah, I was going to say here,
Okay.
or director and
Thank you.
legal counsels, but yes, go ahead, please.
Trevor, the case earlier with the children's cabinet, we see a number of those every year, and some of them are just basically a repeat year after year after year. And I understand that it is required to go through the process. Is there a way to speed that up and make it a director's discretionary permit or a director's under the purview of the director rather than having it have to come to the board every year?
I really appreciate this question. It's an excellent segue into what we've been working on very recently. In fact, we hope to have some closure on it. We're amending our code we're creating a whole new code section on outdoor entertainment, and the idea is to prevent all of these, recurring events having to come back to this board or the county commission every single year. So the idea is to establish an event, process a special use permit, and hopefully avoid that, having to come back. But there's also other, we're also looking at the possibility of, like you said, more administerial type of events, some that may only require director's signature. The bigger ones obviously would have to come before this board or even the county commission, but you're right, the whole purpose is to streamline that process.
Okay.
I think for everyone's benefit. Right?
Great, thank you.
Either,
You bet.
along those same lines, either that or even like a consent agenda, if we did something
Yeah.
like that.
True.
Instead of it defaulting to you, if it still has to come to the board, maybe we have a consent agenda. And ahead of time, we can get it out, and if no one has any questions, we can send it out saying it'll just be automatically approved as a consent item.
You bet.
Just a thought.
Would invite all of you, when we get closer to having a legitimate draft that we want to send out to the public, we'd love your comments on that. Because you're going to be the board that's going to be most affected, most likely, by this code amendment. So.
Next item along those same lines is, and I don't know if we need to discuss it now or maybe think about it and talk about it in another meeting, but the last minute changes for conditions, I just have a problem with that. If it's something simple of, we wanted, can we get, one tree in every 25 feet? I get that, but like we saw today, there was a lot of time, energy, and effort spent on a lot of things that really went nowhere at this point in time, but I have an aversion to last minute here and here and here. I think it just muddies the water, and to get a true understanding and try to basically take a vote on something is extremely difficult. So,
Mr. Chair, I would agree with that wholeheartedly, and I think actually Mr. Bronchick was probably a little bit surprised by some of those changes that were proposed at the last minute, and I don't know how to address that. It's a great point, but my feeling is kind of what we did today. I'm sorry it's too confusing. We need to either up or down or move on.
If I could, and this has been a source of frustration for planners as well, and a lot of times we're not getting information until the last minute. Sometimes there's a CAB meeting the night before, for example, a board meeting, and so we're really scrambling oftentimes, and the last thing we want to do is bring a bunch of changes. I mean, it really is. And I think luckily this is kind of the rare occasion. Typically we don't make very many, if any, changes at all in front of the board. It's certainly something we don't like to do. Yeah.
right, I would say in defense of your staff, it's really not your staff that tends to do this. It tends to be an applicant or someone else that does it. I mean, they've done the best they can, but all of a sudden they're standing out here and they get handed a document saying, we'd like to change this. So I support staff. I understand what they go through, and I understand it's not them doing it. It's usually another entity there. Do you have something else?
I was just going to say the same thing. I thought Chris at the cab and here both did a great job, and he was dancing as fast as he could. It's just if people keep handing him paper and he's obliged to say, I like this one, I don't like that one. The expectation of us being able to analyze this, put it in the package, process it, and come up with a fair vote is a tough one.
Anything else? Okay. Number C on number 10 is discussion and possible action to elect officers chair and vice chair. Does that have to be done this time?
It has to be done?
I guess that's a yes.
I guess that's the answer to that.
All right, any discussion on that item? Mr. Toulouse.
Mr. Chair, I think you have done an outstanding, wonderful job over the past year, and I would like to ask if you would consider serving another term, another year as the chair.
I would second that request.
That's fully within the purview of this board to put, you can serve one more term. So I don't know if that's good or bad news for you, but.
Well, after today.
Okay, then
I would, yes, I will do that if that's what the members so desire. I'll
Thank
vote
you,
one.
Mr. Chair. That being the case, I nominate the existing chair for another term.
Second that nomination.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that being said, I guess we now move to vice chair, and Ms. Hill has been the vice chair, and I appreciate her sitting here to my left. I would continue to go that route as it stands right now.
Are you willing to serve another year as vice chair?
Vice chair is a tough job, but I'll do it.
You'll give it
I'm
your
okay
best,
with
huh?
that, too.
Okay.
With that?
Second that, obviously.
Second that,
All right.
all in favor? Aye.
All in favor? Yeah, there we go.
All right, so we're done there. Director and legal counsel items, report on previous Board of Adjustment items. Mr. Lloyd,
I have nothing to report on this time.
thank you kindly. And legal information and updates, Mr. Large is unavailable, at large. Therefore, Madam Secretary, general public comment.
We have no public comment.
We are adjourned.